It's 1947. A new flag rises over India. Television flickers softly in a few lucky living rooms. And the first instant photograph slowly blooms from silver light. Let's drift together into the gentle hum of the year the world began again. Hello, my dear listener. Tonight, we're traveling back to 1947, a year wrapped in quiet resilience and tender beginnings. The war had ended only 2 years earlier, and across the globe, people were learning how to live without the sound of air raid sirens. They painted their homes again, planted flowers in window sills, and began to trust laughter. The air of 1947 was heavy with memory, yet light with possibility. Nations were rebuilding, hearts were also. The world's rhythm was slower. Letters instead of emails, trains instead of jets, silence between songs instead of the endless noise we know today. As you rest, imagine the faint crackle of a radio in a dimly lit room, a family gathered close, listening to the evening news. Or perhaps a quiet streetlight glowing on a foggy London corner. Tonight, we drift into the gentle pulse of 1947, the year humanity exhaled. World events. In 1947, the world stood between memory and rebirth. Governments formed, borders shifted, and the first sparks of what would be called the Cold War began to flicker. In India, the long twilight of empire came to an end. After nearly 2 centuries of British rule, India and Pakistan were born as independent nations. Crowds filled the streets of Delhi, waving tricolour flags under the August sun, while radios across the subcontinent carried the solemn voice of Jawaharlal Nehru. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. Elsewhere, the United Nations, still young and idealistic, met to shape a fragile peace. Delegates spoke in hopeful tones about cooperation, though the shadow of ideology was beginning to divide East and West. In the United States, President Harry S. Truman announced a plan to support nations threatened by totalitarianism, the beginning of what would be called the Truman Doctrine. The Marshall Plan soon followed, an enormous effort to rebuild Europe with loans, tools, and the promise of friendship. Ships crossed the Atlantic loaded with food, lumber, and medicine, quiet cargoes of hope. Meanwhile, in Britain, rationing still lingered. Children queued for sweets when chocolate briefly returned to the shops, their laughter echoing down streets where bomb damage still marked the walls. King George VI spoke often of courage and patience, words the people still needed to hear. Across Europe, winter was harsh. Coal shortages turned cities dark and cold. Yet, even in the frost, dance halls reopened. Couples swayed to post-war waltzes, reclaiming joy in small, deliberate steps. And far away, in the Pacific, Japan adopted a new constitution, one that renounced war. It was a quiet turning point, a nation once ruled by empire, now guided by peace. In the Middle East, the British prepared to leave Palestine, and the question of a homeland for the Jewish people neared a resolution. The year ended with the United Nations vote to partition the land, an act of hope and conflict intertwined. The world was learning to rebuild, but also learning to dream again. One story that shaped 1947, the independence of India. Let us linger for a while beneath the August sky of Delhi, 1947. The heat shimmers on red sandstone walls. The streets are alive with color, saffron, green, and white fluttering together. Somewhere, a boy holds his father's hand, not yet understanding that he is standing in the first dawn of a new nation. For centuries, India's story had been shaped by voices not its own. But now, at midnight, a soft bell tolled, and a people found their voice again. Pandit Nehru's speech echoed through radios, his words a lullaby of rebirth. There was joy, but also heartbreak, for independence came hand in hand with partition, a line drawn hurriedly between neighbors. Trains carried millions toward uncertain homes. Still, in the midst of pain, lamps were lit, prayers were whispered, and a new flag rose into the monsoon air. The sound of conch shells, temple bells, and distant muezzins mixed in one breath, a song of both sorrow and hope. For the world watching, India's independence was more than politics, it was a promise that freedom, though fragile, could still bloom from struggle. Daily life around the world. Step into an ordinary street in 1947. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and freshly baked bread. In Europe and America, men wear wide suits with padded shoulders, women, calf-length skirts and hair curled in two waves. Children skip rope, their laughter mixing with the rattle of bicycles. At breakfast tables, coffee is still rationed in some countries. In others, people marvel at a new miracle food, instant coffee. Eggs are precious, butter even more so. Housewives trade recipes that stretch ingredients creatively, powdered milk, tinned meat, custard made from cornstarch. Radio fills homes with music, the warm croon of Bing Crosby, the smooth charm of Nat King Cole. Families gather around sets the size of small furniture, twisting dials until a familiar station crackles through. In America, suburban life is beginning. Rows of new houses with tidy lawns appear where fields once stood. Cars like the Studebaker and the Hudson glide along freshly paved roads. Gasoline costs about 23 cents a gallon. A loaf of bread, 13. In London, trams clang along grey streets lined with bomb buildings slowly being rebuilt. The fog is thick, the tea is strong, and hope is practical, found in small comforts like clean sheets, warm socks, and the Sunday roast. In Japan, children play in the shadow of reconstruction. Wooden sandals clack along alleys, paper lanterns sway in evening air. Cherry trees are planted where rubble once lay, symbols of quiet renewal. Across the Soviet Union, life is disciplined but proud. Factories hum, harvests are measured, and the sky is filled with slogans of progress. Yet even there, in small kitchens, families gather around samovars and tell stories of endurance. The year moves slowly. People write letters, visit neighbors, read by lamplight. The hum of the modern world is only beginning to stir. Science, inventions, and technology. Innovation in 1947 feels like magic. After years of war machines, inventors turn their minds to peace. In Bell Laboratories, three men, John Bardeen, William Shockley, and Walter Brattain, create the transistor. A small device, quiet and unassuming, that will one day power the entire digital world. Elsewhere, Polaroid releases the first instant camera. A photograph that appears in your hands within a minute, a marvel to those used to waiting days for development. Commercial television expands. In New York and London, families crowd around tiny screens to watch black and white images dance in the glow. Some call it the window to the world. Others think it a passing fad. In aviation, Chuck Yeager breaks the sound barrier. Faster than the speed of sound, the first human to ride that invisible wall. Yet his flight, secret at the time, feels distant from the quiet homes below, where paper airplanes still flutter in backyards. Medicine makes strides also. Penicillin becomes widely available, saving lives once lost to infection. And scientists begin whispering about something called DNA, the code of life itself. It was a year of beginnings so small they almost went unnoticed. But from these seeds, the modern world would bloom. Culture and the arts. Art in 1947 carries both sorrow and beauty. Writers and musicians seek to make sense of what has been lost, and what can still be found. On cinema screens, Miracle on 34th Street and A Gentleman's Agreement captivate audiences. Stories of kindness and conscience. In theaters, Laurence Olivier's Hamlet holds audiences in reverent silence. In Paris, painters experiment with bold shapes and light. Picasso sketches doves, symbols of peace that soon become global emblems. And in smoky jazz clubs, the smooth notes of Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie rise into midnight air. Bookshelves hold treasures. The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank moves readers with quiet courage. Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann explores the soul of a century that had lost its way. And children find wonder in Goodnight Moon, whispered at bedtime by parents who once whispered warnings instead. Music hums everywhere. Bing Crosby sings White Christmas once more, Billie Holiday's voice aches with elegance. And on radios in dance halls, Glenn Miller's swing keeps spirits light. It is a world rediscovering joy, softly, carefully, like learning to walk again. Media and headlines. Newspapers in 1947 crinkle like parchment. Headlines announce: India gains independence. Marshall Plan proposed. Princess Elizabeth engaged to Philip Mountbatten. In lighter corners of the press, ads promise miracle creams, new radios, and family cars that drive like dreams. Comic strips bring laughter: Blondie, Liel Abner, Dick Tracy. Prices speak softly of another world. A movie ticket, 48 cents. A new house, about $8,000. A postage stamp, 3 cents. People read their news in print, listened on radios, and talked about it over coffee. Not through screens, but through conversation. Each story traveled slowly, giving the heart time to feel before the next arrived. People born and people died this year. In 1947, the world welcomed many who would shape its next chapter. Among them were Stephen Hawking, future explorer of time itself, David Bowie, who would one day turn sound into starlight. Elton John, whose songs would lift generations, Arnold Schwarzenegger, born in a quiet Austrian town, and Hillary Clinton, a future voice in politics. And quietly, the world said farewell to others. To Henry Ford, who gave wheels to the century, Al Capone, whose legend had long outlived his crimes, and Max Planck, the physicist who opened the quantum door. Each life, a thread in the vast tapestry, some bright, some fading. All part of 1947's human symphony. As December settled over the earth, 1947 exhaled with quiet wonder. Snow fell over cities still rebuilding, candles glowed in homes newly hopeful. The scars of war were still visible, yet beneath them, something tender stirred, the slow return of peace. Letters crossed oceans that winter. Families wrote of children born, gardens planted, dreams postponed but not forgotten. The radio hummed carols, factories dimmed their lights for the holidays. In quiet corners of every continent, people looked toward 1948 with a cautious faith that the world might continue mending, day by day. The century was only halfway through, but already its heart had learned both sorrow and grace. And so, dear listener, you've drifted through the gentle echoes of 1947, a year that carried both endings and beginnings in equal measure. As you rest, imagine the soft turning of the world, the hum of a radio, the flicker of candlelight, the heartbeat of a planet rediscovering calm. If you enjoyed this quiet journey, I invite you to stay close. Like, subscribe, and join me again beneath the stars, as we visit another year and another dream. Until then, may your night be peaceful, your thoughts gentle, and your dreams full of light. Good night.